Danielle Smith has lost a huge political asset by no longer having Justin Trudeau as a punching bag.
Joining me this week, NDP strategist Leah Ward, Liberal strategist Sabrina Grover, and Conservative strategist Colin Aitchison. Colin, not even 24 hours after the election results were in and the Premier was out blasting this new Liberal government, and then today doubled down, saying if Ottawa has its way, Albertans will be left to freeze in the dark under the new clean electricity regulations. So you're here to talk politics, not policy. What is the Premier's strategy in coming out of the gate so hot so quickly?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that she came out swinging. Look, the clean electricity regulations were one of the policies that she'd really told Prime Minister Carney before the election needed to be reversed in order for the two governments to kind of reset their relationship. In terms of why now, I think she's trying to set the stage. She's hoping to show UCP voters that she's still going to continue standing up to Ottawa. And she's hoping to show Alberta voters who overwhelmingly voted Conservative across the province that she's not going to accept the status quo and that things need to change. And that she believes that there needs to be more support for Alberta's energy and resource development sectors. So I think that's why she hit the ground running. She came out swinging. She's already talked to the Prime Minister about this beforehand, didn't really get a commitment during the election, and she wants to make sure that she's showing her voters and voters who opposed the Liberal government that she's going to continue standing up to those kind of policies.
Leah, do you agree? Is it more about tone setting than this specific policy, trying to get Mark Carney to climb down from it?
I mean, if you're talking about setting the stage, I would say maybe stage direction, writing, playwriting, all of the above. Like, Danielle Smith has lost a huge political asset by no longer having Justin Trudeau as a punching bag. And so what she needs to do right now is establish new benchmarks from which to beat up on Ottawa to distract from what's going on in Alberta. This has been an incredibly politically useful tool for her in the past, and losing it would be a huge risk, particularly when she's plagued with scandal and healthcare crisis and underfunded schools and a whole bunch of things that voters are unhappy with in Alberta.
So, Sabrina, how would you counsel the new Prime Minister to handle this shot across the bow, given everything that Colin and Leah just said?
I think that for the new Prime Minister, for Mark Carney coming in, I would really attempt on being more on the reset relationship side. I think that this is an opportunity to walk back from some of the tensions that Alberta faced when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister. And I think that Carney has demonstrated his reasonability on things like the carbon tax as an example, and does come from kind of that more centrist side of the spectrum where he does have the ability to negotiate with Danielle Smith. And I think that part of that will be who he puts in cabinet, importantly, both on the energy file and the environment file. But for Danielle Smith, I think, there's no better business for the Premier, for a Conservative Premier of Alberta to be punching down in Ottawa. And she's seeing a vacuum of Conservative leadership while Pierre remains the leader. He doesn't have a seat and he doesn't really have a ton of authority, I think, right now. And she's riding high on this surge of Conservative votes in the last on Monday. So I think that she's going to try and draw that out. But I also think Albertans are going to get tired of that.
Colin, that begs the question, even if Mark Carney comes to the table in good faith and tries to carve out some wins with Smith, is it just going to be too strategically aligned with her long-term plan of re-election to give in to that? In other words, it's just too valuable, the ability to bash Ottawa.
I think that there are wins on both directions, right? If she's able to get and sell herself as showing that she was able to get the federal government to back down on policies that she feels that Albertans don't support, like the clean electricity regulations, she can go to the polls next election and say, look what I've done, look what I've been able to do and bring to Alberta and bring for Alberta, and sell voters on her success in kind of navigating a Liberal government. At the same time, you're right. It is an age-old strategy for Conservative premiers in Alberta, and Sabrina mentioned that if there are enough policies that the UCP opposes and Conservative voters in the province oppose, she could continue punching. So I could see wins on both directions. So it wouldn't surprise me to see a continued kind of adversarial relationship while also celebrating those wins.
Now, while the Premier had her preferred message today, reporters were focused on a letter that was sent to Smith by a couple of First Nation chiefs that accused the Premier of trying to manufacture a national unity crisis by lowering the threshold for a referendum on secession. to be held. So the chief's pointing out that Alberta's on treaty lands after all. Leah, what did you make of this development?
Oh, they're right. It's important that that's part of the conversation as we continue to see this entirely manufactured crisis come out of the Premier's office. I mean, you saw during the election, Preston Manning sort of he said predict, but in fact, it was a warning that they would start stoking these flames of separation if there was a Liberal win. Danielle Smith coming out immediately afterwards with mechanisms through which to channel that frustration while simultaneously stoking it has completely erased First Nations from the conversation. I'm glad that they've stepped up and entered in, and I think that needs to be taken incredibly seriously. Even as the Premier claims to not be interested in moving towards separation herself, she's using it as a political weapon in her desire to continue to fight grievance politics, and it's incredibly damaging in a moment where we need national unity, and in particular, as the chiefs have noted, in respect to treaties.
Sabrina, what do you think about this moving of the threshold lower so that referenda on whatever subject we should point out, and the Premier made that clear today, it doesn't have to be on this, but it could, to make it more potentially possible?
I think that a lot of the policies that came out today and in the last 24 hours are, very self-centered and very, aimed for the Premier to try and gain a greater share of power. We also saw the removal of the ban on corporate and union donations come through, the removal of vote tabulators. So a lot of things that the Premier's doing to stoke, this sensationalism amongst a small group, I'd say, of Albertans that think that separatism is the best approach. But I think largely, if you look at Canadians and you look at the large swath of Albertans, they don't want that. They, as Leah said, want national unity. They want somebody or leaders across this country to stand up to Donald Trump. And when you look at the premiers in this country, Danielle Smith is the least likely to be doing that. We see premiers like Doug Ford coming out, on top of that and actually standing up for Canada and showing his citizens that he's willing to be part of Canada as opposed to removed from the Canadian conversation. And I think that's what Albertans want to see. I think this, nonsense about this national unity crisis is, again, just another way for Danielle Smith to stoke the flames of her base and to light herself on fire. But I don't think it's going to fly with the majority of the province.
Colin, Smith faced a lot of questions about this today, but she was not asked if a referendum on secession were to somehow deliver a yes, if she would honor it. Do you think she would?
I'm not too sure, and I don't really want to dive into hypotheticals. I haven't had a chance to have a conversation with the Premier on whether or not
Don't make it sound like you're a politician. I mean, she has a base, presumably, that would be aligned with that and pushing for it. So would that handcuff her on this?
Yeah. I mean, look, like a recent poll showed 3 in 10 Albertans are supportive. That's a very vocal minority. This province is made up of a lot of people, myself included, who are not originally from Alberta and who are proud Canadians, and Albertans born and raised who are also proud Canadians. And I think that's why that polling kind of shows that figure. I genuinely don't think the government is interested in leading a separation movement, leaving Canada. I don't think it would be to the advantage of Alberta as a province, and I don't think they'd be a very effective independent country, just given the landlocked dynamic and everything else. But I also want to point out that citizens-initiated referendums are non-binding. She would not be required to do it, nor would any premier who's to say that the referenda, if it were to happen, would come under her premiership. So, look, I don't want to speculate whether she would or not, because I genuinely don't know. But I don't believe anyone in this current government would really be supportive of Alberta leaving Canada.
One of the groups pushing for this is telling CBC News today that they already have about 200,000 signatures or indications that they would sign a petition on their website. And yes, not technically binding, but they're pushing for this to be on the municipal ballots across the province in the fall. Leah, I mean, not technically binding, but politically, how tricky would that be, if you will indulge the hypothetical, should this group or others meet the bar for a yes?
It's incredibly dangerous. I mean, we saw what happened to Jason Kenney when he continued to appease a loud and vocal and powerful base who ended up, I mean, his term was the lunatics are running the asylum as he was being pushed out of the premier's office. And so, similarly here, we do see relatively low levels of support for separation in Alberta. The current levels are not as high as they have been, even under Jason Kenney, but a persistent sort of 25, peaking at 30% of people. But one of the things that keeps that number down is the idea that it's not likely to happen. And so if people in power like Preston Manning and the Premier herself are leading the charge for it, more people might see this as an actual possibility, and that pressure grows. And what she has proven to us is that she succumbs to that type of pressure. So I think it's an incredibly dangerous game to be playing right now.
Yeah, and I'll also point out, as we just saw with the election, the polls might show something, the populace at large, but it really all comes down to who actually shows up and votes. So that 30% is, I would think, pretty motivated, but I'll have to speak for the entire group. Let's hope we don't get to that point. Before we go, the news cycle is insane. Here we are just a couple of days after the election and we're already moving forward. So let's look back for a second. Leah, your party in particular, you were part of the national campaign. I want to talk about the NDP's performance because I'm sure you've heard more than one pundit talking about this being such a historically poor performance with only 7 seats for your party, that maybe it's time that merger that's been kicked around on the center left for years, the NDP and the Liberals go ahead, like we saw with the PCs and the Canadian Alliance on the center right. Do you think that could happen?
I don't. This recent election is actually excellent evidence for why the NDP needs to exist, despite the devastating result for the party. But what we see with the Liberals is a move further to the right, opening up all of the space on the left and moving further and further away from the values that define and motivate and propel New Democrats. Justin Trudeau moved the Liberals to the left, which sort of closed the gap and like sucked a bit of the oxygen out of the space the NDP could occupy. I would argue there are still a lot of differences between what they were doing and what New Democrats would have done. But especially now, as the Liberals move to the right, the role for the New Democrats is more important than ever. And again, despite sort of what was obviously a bad night, a bad election for the party, in 6 provinces in the country, the NDP either holds government or official opposition. And if you add Yukon, they hold the balance of power. So there's strong roots across the country of New Democrats who are credible, who have government experience, who have organizing experience,
Gotcha.
And have a set of beliefs and ideology that is currently unrepresented in Parliament. So, we're down. I don't think we're out.
Sabrina, do you think people in your party would be eyeing members of that small caucus and trying to pick them off, get them across the floor, talking about a potential merger?
Well, I think, certainly Mark Carney and the Liberals do have to find a way to create a stable coalition to govern, as long as they're able to with this minority government. And so I can't imagine that this thought hasn't crossed the minds of at least some Liberals. But I think to Leah's point, I think the NDP has really strong balances of power provincially. But I also think that does not translate federally. And we aren't seeing the consistency of NDP policies that are being implemented provincially. In Alberta, we even saw that, Naheed campaigned on potentially removing that link between the NDP provincially and federally. And so I actually think that party from a national level maybe doesn't have the viability that they once did under a previous leader, and doesn't have that message or that voice to be communicating to Canadians to make that case. Whereas provincially they are. And I think you've seen almost the reverse for the Liberals, right? You've seen the Liberals not have as much strength provincially, looking at Ontario, with the exception of New Brunswick, but really coming back and bouncing back for that national conversation. So I think there is a valuable conversation to be had about where the progressive vote lives in Canada, how it's divided based on a provincial level versus a national level. Yep. And I think there might be some compromises made.
Let's end, Colin, on the conversation that continues within your party. Should Pierre Poilievre continue on with his leadership? Have you seen any signs, like credible signs, that his leadership is under threat?
No, I don't think so. And the reason why I think it's a bit different for Pierre Poilievre than it was for Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer is, like, Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, they did an effective job leading the party. I think Pierre Poilievre helped reinvent the party, kind of grow its base. We saw youth voting. We saw traditional Labour voters who might have actually gone New Democrat voting for the Conservative Party as well. And instead of just leading the party, he's kind of created a new movement and kind of reinvented what it looks like to be a Conservative in Alberta. I think the party itself, under his leadership, will be able to kind of maintain that coalition moving into the next election. That could be as close as 18 months, could be 24, could be 4 if they're able to kind of find that balance of power for the Mark Carney Liberals. But I think one of the benefits of keeping Pierre Poilievre on, if you're a Conservative, is he's going to be able to keep onto that coalition. And I'm not sure if Mark Carney is going to be able to do the same. That's kind of going back to the points that both Sabrina and Leah just talked about, is that the NDP are going to be coming back. And if that NDP support that went to the Liberals bleeds back to the New Democrats and they win 10 seats across the country that they picked up, that the Liberals were able to pick up, it's a different ballgame, right?
Okay.
It's a much harder coalition, I think, for the Liberals.
Yeah.
So that's why I think Pierre is going to stay on.
We're getting way ahead of ourselves to the next election already. I want to end on Pierre. And just a final question, Colin. There's a lot of talk about where he might run. A lot of potential Alberta seats have been discussed. Where do you think he's going to run?
I'm not sure. I'd pick a rural Ontario seat or Alberta, somewhere safe where he can guarantee get in and start leading within the House sooner than later.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Robust conversation. Enjoyed hanging out with you three. Thanks for taking the time.